We're talking today with Roy Davis of Hartford, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, can you begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Okay, I was born right here in Hartford. Hartford's a small town, about 2,500 people. My dad said one time facetiously, the population remains pretty constant. Every time a baby's born, somebody leaves town. So anyway, grew up here. Marion's folks moved from down near Riverside, and they were fruit farmers out south of town. And she came to Hartford School, and that's how we met.
Okay. Now, what year were you born?
1924.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living then?
My father was a florist. He owned the Hartford greenhouse, the only greenhouses around. So my sister and I lived in World of Summer all winter long. The greenhouses were attached to our house, so we had a World of Summer all winter long.
Now, did you grow a lot of stock to sell to farmers or just to people for their gardens?
No, it was decorative.
Okay.
Funerals, anniversaries, prom time, all the kids in Hartford would come and get a little corsage for their girlfriends. And when my dad waited until I got home in 1946, and he said, the only reason I haven't sold the business is because I wanted to see if you were interested in taking it over. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have a green thumb. My thumb is brown. He said, enough said. He sold the greenhouses.
All right. So how many kids were in your family?
2, my sister and I.
Okay. All right. Now, what was life like for you in the 30s? I mean, it's the Depression. I mean, how does a florist do at that point in time?
My dad he had 2 greenhouses, and he started to build 2 more. And the big Depression hit in 1929. And I never knew it at the time. We always had 3 meals on the table. I didn't know we were in a depression. I'll never know how they worried. But I noticed that the building of the greenhouses stopped, and he never completed them. Well, we had a jungle of construction stuff out there to play in as we were kids.
All right. Now, as you got older, you're in high school and so forth, get into the late 30s and so forth, trouble starts brewing in Europe. War starts there.
42.
Yeah. So you're in high school when the war starts in Europe. Now, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying any attention to the news of the world, or just looking at?
Not really. I can remember the day, Pearl Harbor Day. We were playing the pinball machine in Clark's drugstore down on Main Street. And some kid came in and said, hey, did you hear Pearl Harbor's been bombed by the Japanese? I said, oh, really? And we went on with our pinball game.
Did you even know what Pearl Harbor was?
We didn't know.
Yeah.
But you know, my dad was kind of far-seeing. In 1938, one night we were going somewhere in a car and had the radio on, and their newsman was just telling how Hitler had marched into Czechoslovakia, I think. And my dad turned and looked at me, he says, this is World War II coming, and you're going to be in it. I said, no way, no way. How prophetic he was.
Right. Okay. So Pearl Harbor happens, and then once the news really hits, I mean, does life change at all in Hartford?
Life changed tremendously. They slapped a gas rationing on us, which cut down on our social life considerably. And believe it or not, there was a national speed limit of 35 miles an hour.
Wow.
And you had to get gas with ration stamps, and my dad, because he had a business, had a B sticker. So he got a little extra gas, so once in a while he could slip a sticker for me so I could ask Marion out on a date.
All right. And did they have civil defense stuff going? Did you have air raid drills or anything like that?
Not really. We're so far away from everything.
Right.
The war really didn't touch us, except I noticed one thing. Young guys, kept disappearing. They'd enlist, they'd be drafted, and I thought, that's going to happen to me. Well, I graduated in 42, and I went over to Willow Run to get a job because they were making bombers over there, and the personnel manager said back, he's like, well, son, I wish you'd come to me a few months earlier. He said, you know, you're about 3 or 4 months from being drafted according to your age. He said, if you'd come to me 6 months earlier, he said, I could even have gotten you a deferment.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, too bad. So I went home and enlisted as an aviation cadet in the Army Air Corps.
All right. Now, how did you learn about that program?
Well, I always wanted to fly when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Only time I'd been flying was at the Hartford Fair. They had a old biplane there, and a guy took people up for rides. And my friend and I went over. We wanted to give a ride, 50 cents. And we looked. Here was the guy sitting on the nose up on the cowl, filling the gas tank in his plane, smoking a cigar. And I said, Russell, back off. We went back to the edge of the field until he got done. We paid our 50 cents, and that's the first time I'd ever been up in an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to learn how to fly.
Okay. All right. Now, what was the setup for the aviation cadets? How did that program work?
Well, I enlisted as an aviation cadet and got what I wanted. A friend of mine and I went over to Fort Custer and we took the mental exam. Both passed. Went back over, I borrowed my dad's car with his B sticker. Went back over, took the physical, and I passed, and my friend failed. He was underweight.
Mm-hmm.
He went home, he was so crestfallen, and what he did, he got a job shoveling coal at the Gleaner elevator, emptying coal cars, and drank a chocolate milkshake every day. When he put on enough weight, he went back and took the exam and passed.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, they'd passed the crest of need for all the pilots, and his whole class was washed out. Radio operators, he became a ball turret gunner.
All right. Now, as for you, you were on schedule. So when do you actually report for training?
June 1st, went to Texas on a troop train,
It's June 1st of what year?
1943.
Okay.
And met some of the guys that I went most of the way through cadet training with there. It was strange. Sheppard Field.
Now, did you have any kind of sort of basic training first? Or
Oh yes, 12 weeks. We used to run every morning 5 miles around the inside perimeter of the base.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd look out and I'd see people out there going to work, coming home from work, out exercising the dog. And I thought, here I am running 5 miles every day
In the summer in Texas.
in the summer in Texas.
Okay. What else were you doing at that time?
Well, that interesting thing, it's like a jungle gym, a big jungle gym. Excuse me, chapstick. Huge contraption. They'd run us through. We had to work our way through, swinging on bars and so on, clear up to the top. And we came out on top, and there's a huge beam up there with a parachute harness fastened to the beam. And each one of us, one at a time, we had to put on the parachute harness, fast up, and then jump. And when we reached the end of that 10-foot tether, boom! And then we had to unbuckle our parachute harness and drop. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the guys unbuckled his chest strap first, he went, and he couldn't get out. So we learned something from that. Mm-hmm. They said if you ever bail out over water, unfasten your straps and hold your arms like that until you're almost to the line, and then slip out of it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did you have, in those first 3 months, did you have any classroom training too, or?
Yeah, we had training in gas attacks. We had to go through a huge tent filled with gas. I'm sure it was tear gas, not poison gas. We had to run inside, hold your breath, give your name, rank, and serial number, get your gas mask out, blow the air, put it on, and start breathing. And one kid stuttered. He couldn't get it out. They hauled him off by his feet. But I got mine on.
All right. Now, at this stage, were they washing people out, or were you all kind of getting through it?
Yeah, some of my friends didn't make it. Some of them I could almost predict. I had one kid who was big. I think we called him Dutch. And one other part from that big jungle gym we had was a big hawser, huge rope, and we had to swing hand over hand about 150 feet across a big sea of mud and let go at the other end. Well, this big kid would get out in the middle and he'd say, I can't do it. Come on, Dutch, come on, you can make it. You let go, chest deep in mud, and he'd wade out. They'd send him home. And when we come in from the rest, there he was all scrubbed up and reading a comic book, but he was unhappy. And a few days after that, when we came through the mess hall, he was serving. He'd been washed out. He's working in the kitchen now.
All right. Now, after the first 3 months, then what do you do?
Pilots were getting backed up. There's a backlog. So they sent us to a thing called College Training Detachment. And I went to Wittenberg University, which was my first college I'd ever been to. And for 3 months, they give us classes in navigation, math, science. I think they were trying to make us into officers and gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, there was the original expectation before the war that pilots had to be college graduates. And so they were cramming some college in there while they were killing time.
And the last part of that 3 months, we were in the flying squadron, and we got 10 hours of flying in a Piper Cub or a Taylorcraft or something. So that was my second experience flying.
Okay. Now, when you were doing that, were you going as a passenger, or were you starting to actually take the controls? And...
Oh, the instructor would have us fly, but I wasn't very good at it.
Okay. All right. So you do that for how long? 3 months?
3 months.
Okay. And then what's your next step?
Back to pre-flight. This is at San Antonio, Texas. And we got through pre-flight, lost a few more people there. Then they sent us down to Uvalde, Texas for primary flight training.
What do you do in pre-flight?
Classes, navigation, Morse code. Oh, I can remember Morse code. They have us all sitting in there going, doo-doo, doo-doo, doo, doo-doo-doo. We'd have to be translating, and one kid dropped his pencil. Bang, bang on the phone, the next kid, I can't do this anymore, and he got up and stalked out. But I got through that.
How fast did you have to be able to do the code?
I don't know, 10, 15 words a minute maybe,
Okay.
I don't know. But, well, you know, it's necessary because you use Morse code once in a while, like designations for air bases are all in Morse code.
Okay. So you've got that kind of stuff. And did the classroom training overlap with the stuff that you had in college at all, or was there connections?
I can't remember much. No, because that was more gentleman and officer. This was flying, navigation, engines, Morse code, airframes, stuff like that.
Okay, so more geared directly toward flying.
Yeah.
Okay. You survived that.
Yeah.
Then what?
Uvalde, Texas, for primary flight training. A Fairchild PT-19, which is a low-wing monoplane. It was kind of like a dragonfly. It's not overly powered, but I got down there, and the luck of the draw on instructors. And I got an instructor that was he was an old man, about 35.
Yep.
And I was 19. And if you didn't do something right, he'd swear at you. They had one-way intercom from the instructor to the student. And the more he'd swear, I'd do something wrong, and then he'd swear some more. And finally, one day he said, Davis, he said, we're not getting along very well. He said, I'm going to have you ride with one of my friends. He says, I want to have him see what he thinks about you. Now he says, this is not a check ride. I'm not going to wash out, but I want you, just want him. Okay. So I went up with that guy, and I did everything right. Soft-voiced man. I could feel a velvet touch on that. This was a stick in front and a stick in back. I could feel his gentle touch. I did lazy age, chandelles, turns, all this. He got back down, we got out, took our parachutes out. He says, well, Davis, I can't see anything wrong with your flying. And so he told my instructor, and my instructor came out and he says, all right, maybe it's me. Which it was.
Yes.
And after that, our relationship was better. And we started having some fun. Oh, he showed me some tricks, some acrobatic tricks, like a hammerhead stall.
What's that?
Well, you dive the plane, you get plenty of altitude. Dive the plane full throttle, right straight up until it stops. Kick the rudder, you fall off into a spin. And he showed me that. And another thing he showed me, on one of the fields, auxiliary fields, there was a bush right in the center out there, and he says, watch this. We came in about 10 feet off the ground, and he put the wing on that, and he went around, kept that wing right on that, 10 feet off the ground. I'm going, and he got around all right, and pulled up, and he says, now don't you ever try that. And one day I scared him. I was out flying, just cutting didos around, just having fun, and a cloud cover crept in over the base. Didn't scare me any. I knew we just had basic instruments. Mm-hmm. I came back over the field, and I let down through that thin layer, made my pattern. When I get down there, he was pacing back and forth, smoking cigarettes and stomping them out. He says, Davis, I was worried about you. I said, no, it's all right. I'll never forget the day he got out of the airplane and said, well, you think you can take this thing around by yourself? I said, sure. He told me, he says, don't ever be halfway. Either you can do something or you can't. Don't ever be halfway. I said, sure I can. So he got out and I gunned the thing out went out onto the landing strip, and I full throttle, tail up, pulled up over the fence. I looked back, nobody back there. I waggled the tail a little bit, and I was singing at the top of my lungs. You know what I was singing? Sophie Tucker's, "From one of these days you're going to miss me, honey." Mm-hmm. It was a marvelous feeling.
All right. So you successfully made it through that stage, and now at what point do they start sorting people out in terms of what kind of aircraft you're going to fly? Is that at the next level?
Yeah,
or beyond
that's
that?
at the next level. We went to basic from there, and we flew Vultee BT-13s. We call it the Vultee vibrator. You've probably heard
that expression,
before.
yes. And why did they call it that?
Well, because it was noisy and shook. And it was a big airplane and just a little underpowered. As a matter of fact, while I was going through cadets there, a hot flash came down from headquarters. They're famous for that. No more student-only spins. And if you get in a spin and you can't recover by 3,000 feet, you bail out. Because that BT-13 had a kind of a tendency not to want to pull out of a spin. Mm-hmm. Well, so we refrained from practicing tailspins after that. And a friend of mine came in one day and his face was white as a sheet. I said, what happened to you? He says, I went into a spin. And he says, I couldn't get out of it. The thing wouldn't come out of the spin no matter what I did. He said, I watched the altimeter reach 3,000 feet. And he said, I reached up, pulled open the canopy, and it pulled out of a spin all by itself.
All right. Did you have any problems flying it?
Not really. I was the first guy in my squadron to solo in it. Mm-hmm. I luck of the draw. This time I got an instructor who was a hotshot fighter pilot. Frustrated. He showed me some more tricks. Mm-hmm. And we'd flown out to an auxiliary field and we made a couple of 3 landings. I only had about 3 hours in the thing. And he got out casually, put his parachute on the ground, lit a cigarette, sat down. I said, all right, Davis, take this thing around by yourself. Mm-hmm. Boy, I got in, I took off. Glory again. Mm-hmm. And I looked over, there was a sharecropper's cabin over here, and all the little kids were hanging out on the fence, little girls in their gingham dresses, all hoping to see me pile the thing up, I think. Mm-hmm. But when I came home that night, I was the only guy that had soloed. Mm-hmm. And all because this hotshot I thought a lot of him. He was great.
Was he somebody who had done well enough that they just kept him as a trainer and he wanted to go fight, or?
I don't know. I don't know whether he screwed up or what, but he was a fighter pilot, all right. And I can remember the last ride we took. He said, "There's a tradition here that the last ride, the instructor and student get to trade places, and you can make me go through whatever you want me to do. You want to do that?" I says, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we're not supposed to do it anymore, but we'll do it anyway." So I put on his officer's cap, got in the back seat, and off we went. We were up there, and he was doing things with that BT-13 I didn't think were possible. And all of a sudden, I cut the throttle. I said, "Forced landing." Oh, he's looking for a hayfield. There was one down there. He came in at full flaps, too high, too hot. Missed it, put the power to it, and we pull out. I said to him, I said, "You know, you ought to be on a street corner selling pencils." And his ears were bright red. But he didn't invite me to do it, so
Right.
he didn't say anything. If that had been a real forced landing, he'd have dumped it right into the fence. Moments of glory.
Okay, so far you're having a pretty good time in the service.
Yeah.
What was life like on those bases?
Well, life was like on the basis that we didn't get into town. We were kept so busy. They wanted to make sure that we were fully occupied all the time. So we had classes in navigation, engines, airframes, all that stuff, in addition to our flying. And I can remember one day, nature foiled them. This is Uvalde, Texas, right down on the border. This is a town where former Vice President Jack Garner, Cactus Jack Garner, lived. He had a pecan ranch down there, famous for that. So anyway, one day we got up and there was about 1.5 inches of snow on the ground. They got so excited, they called off, they closed the base, gave us the day off. And I looked around, I thought, well, in Michigan, this is just an average winter day. But we didn't mind.
Okay. So how long did you stay there?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
A couple
exactly.
of months, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on to basic. And then from Waco, that's where they sorted us out. A few of the guys who were really good were sent to do advanced training on B-25s somewhere nearby. And the rest of us went to either the single engine school or multi-engine. I don't know why they put me in multi-engine, which is fine with me. I didn't care. So I went to right across town in Waco to multi-engine advanced training. There we flew Cessna UC-78s. This, we call it the bamboo bomber. Of course, it's made of wood. Nice little twin-engine plane with 4 seats in it. And there we had to do navigation, always 2 cadets together, or a cadet and an instructor. And we had to do cross countries and night cross countries. And I can remember one night cross country, the last one I took. It was, we almost had all of our time in. Another cadet that I drew for going with me, he said, "You know," he said, "I don't feel very good." He said, I'm so nervous, I don't know what to do." He said, "Would you mind flying the whole trip tonight?" Well, I minded, but I didn't say anything. So I flew the whole trip. We took off, I did the pre-flight check, did the after takeoff check, and I forgot something. Down between the seats, there's a valve. It's a cross feed for the gas tanks, so that both gas tanks and wings feed both engines. Well, if one fuel pump gives out, the other one will take over. But when you get up in the air, past takeoff, you're supposed to switch off the cross feed so each one is feeding its own. I forgot that. Well, we did the whole night cross country, all the way around. I don't remember where all we went. Got back, came in, made a good pattern, landed, taxied up in front of under the lights. I looked down and I says, hey, I forgot to turn off the crossfeed valve. I turned it off and the right engine quit. And I thought, whoa, if I'd have done that after I took off, that engine would have quit then.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a rule, another hot flash came through. If an engine quits on takeoff, land straight ahead. You can't turn. You don't have enough flying speed. And if you're up high altitude and one engine quits, bail out, even at night, because one engine on that Cessna UC-78 was not enough to get it back home.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave that a good thought, and I thought, you know, if that ever happens to me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a tower and tell them, I've got an engine that's cutting out, and I want a straight in and flat approach. Now get that thing in. I'm not going to bail out over Texas at night.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, we're under the lights, and I turned off the valve, and the engine quit.
Mm-hmm.
I called the tower, and I says, send a mule out here and haul this thing in. It just quit. And we walked in.
Very good. All right. Now, were there problems with accidents? Did guys get hurt?
Yeah. In basic flight training, a friend of mine was having trouble soloing the BT-13, and he was doing touch-and-go landings. We'd all gotten past that. Well, the BT-13 is very nose-heavy, and it's a wheel here that trims the tabs, so when you land, you're trimmed for landing, and then before you take off, you got to roll the trim tab back so you can take off. He forgot to roll it back. He took off, and the plane stalled,
Mm-hmm.
and when he hit the canopy, sliced his head right off. And we were all waiting in line to take off on a cross country that morning. And I can remember the wreck was still right off the runway. And when we went by, I didn't look at it.
Mm-hmm. Was that the only fatality you had at that point, or?
Yeah, that was the first fatality we had. We had two more guys in advanced. On the UC-78, they were doing night touch-and-go landings. And he and this guy and another cadet lost complete power. I don't know what happened. The engines were still running. They didn't have a radio. They didn't have any lights. They were a ghost ship flying around in the traffic pattern. So he didn't know what to do, so he just made the pattern and came in for landing. And the tower saw him when he got into the lights of the field, said, plane on the final approach, pull up, there's another plane there. The other plane pulled up and sawed their tail right off. They went into the ground, both of them were killed. And one of them had his wife there for his graduation. Well, a strange thing happened to me just a few nights before graduation. I had a dream. Don't make me dream it. But here I was in my cot, and I was dreaming. I was flying this UC-78. All of a sudden, there was another one in front of me. I could see the numbers on the fuselage. Bang! We hit it. And I woke up, and I was clutching the sides of my cot. I wondered if that was something, that I should worry about. So I sweated that out. The last few flights, nothing happened.
Well, that's good.
Never saw it. But a strange thing happened. Years later, Marion and I were living here in Hartford. I bet maybe 20 years ago, that night, I dreamed that same dream. And here was this plane in front of me. Bang! Only this time, I bailed out. And I looked, I can remember vividly in the dream, I looked in my one hand, I had my parachute on, in my one hand, I had a Pentax camera. And I thought, how can I, no, I was holding my parachute. I said, how can I get that parachute on? I threw the camera and said, I'm going to get another one. I struggled into my harness, buckled all the straps. By this time, I'm in free fall. And I can remember the terrain was low mountains and brown, and I was approaching at tremendous speed. And I pulled the ripcord, that red handle, pop, and it blossomed, and I woke up when we were in bed in the bedroom.
Did they have you actually practice parachuting, or just
Never.
going off of a platform or anything like that?
I spent 3 years trying not to use one of those. I wasn't about to use one,
Okay.
if I didn't have to.
All right, so they would teach you what you're supposed to do, but they never actually
Taught us
drew
what
you
to
out.
do, but I never had to
Okay.
do it.
Now, talk a little bit more about the advanced part of the program. Talk about the aircraft you had there, the one that had the crash with the two guys. What was that like to fly as opposed to the first one?
Well, that was a UC-78, twin engine.
Yep.
From there, they sent us to Reno, Nevada for transition on C-46s. Let me get another drink of water. Meanwhile, something had happened. When I graduated from flight training, second lieutenant, gold bar, gleaming in the sun, came home on 30 days leave. And Marion and I had dated in high school, very much in love. Broke up, went our ways. She went into nurses training, and I went into the Air Force. When I came home, she just happened to be home on leave at the same time. We got back together again. And that's from then on, we were never apart.
All right. So now, in the meantime, you've got work to do. So you're where, I guess, with the. So where are you now actually doing the transition part? Where was
10
that?
hours in the C-46 at Reno, Nevada.
Okay.
Not enough. I had no more than a nodding acquaintance with that airplane, which is the biggest freight hauler that the Air Force had. A huge two-engine, the one with a cigar-shaped fuselage. It was so powerful. It had R-2800s in it. It would fly fully loaded on one engine and even climb. But it had sophisticated hydraulic systems in it and required really good maintenance. And when I got out way up in the upper Assam Valley in India, we didn't always have that kind of maintenance. And we had a lot of stories about how hydraulic systems would leak and the troubles they'd have. I never experienced any of that myself, but I wasn't there that long.
Did you get any training on the C-47 or just the C-46?
No. When I went overseas, I was put in with a bunch of guys who were older. How about stopping that thing just for a second?
No, I'd asked you about flying C-47s, and you made a comment about getting overseas and serving with some guys who were older.
Well, I'd never been in a C-47 except as a passenger, which was a standard airliner then.
Yeah, it was a DC-3 for civilians.
Yeah. So anyway, I got over there, and all the guys were older. I was 20 years old. Wherever I went, I was the youngest guy on my base. Not dry behind the ears. And these guys were older, and they were experienced pilots. I was not destined to be a command pilot because they were just, these guys were great. As a matter of fact, they taught me some things that I never learned in flight training. They finished my education, and they sort of took me under their wing, and they were so good that they taught me all the little tricks they knew. And then finally we got down to Burma where they had nothing but C-47s. I got to the point that I was flying half the time in the left seat, and I loved it. And the last trip I made, I never knew when it was because I got some sort of a bug. But the last trip I can remember, I was particularly satisfied. I was thinking, I've got this thing now to the point that I know what I'm doing.
All right. Now, how did flying a C-47 compare with flying a C-46?
Oh, C-47 is much easier because it's so much smaller. When you're sitting in a C-46, now these are all tail draggers. You sit up there, you're 25 feet from the ground, and you're like sitting in a greenhouse. And it's like flying a barn. But it's a marvelous airplane if it's treated right.
Okay. But a C-47, you're kind of lower down, and the cockpit is just part of the
smaller.
fuselage.
Smaller.
Okay. All right. So it's going to go back here to your training. So you had 10 hours on a C-46. Okay. Now what do they do with you?
Well, they send us overseas.
Okay. And how does that work?
Well, they gathered us all. I think I was in, I don't remember, somewhere in St. Louis, I think, somewhere, where they staging us. And we had a sergeant. He said, all right, you guys, you got to get all your gear together because you're going to head for overseas now. Where are we going? Where are we going? He said, can't tell you. Come on, Sarge. You know where we're going. Where are we going? It's classified. I can't tell you. Then he went, oh, going to fly the hump.
Mm-hmm.
The highest mountains in the world. The roof of the world. Now this starts up here, Kathmandu and Mount Everest, comes around, wraps around Burma like that. Down in the south, it fritters away to about 10,000 feet. But where we crossed, the peaks were anywhere from 13 to 15, 16,000 feet. And the weather was so configured over there that there was a westerly wind most of the time, and the thermals would go up those mountainsides and form thunderstorms. And sometimes they'd reach up to 50 or 60,000 feet. We know airplanes are not made to fly through thunderstorms. Matter of fact, pilots religiously fly around thunderstorms. We had to fly through them. That's the only way we could get there. And we didn't, after the first few weeks I was over there, they were pushing the Japanese down far enough. We weren't really worried about Japanese. They wouldn't be out in that weather.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to back up here to the main part of your story. See, the sergeant has kind of given you your clue where you're going. Okay. But now how did they get you out there?
How do they get us there?
How do you get out to India? Yeah.
Okay. They sent us to New York, Fort Totten, which is one of the oldest Army bases in the whole country. And we were leaving the next morning on C-54 to fly across the Atlantic. So that night we all sat, we went to the PX, and everybody had to have a knife, a jungle knife. So we all bought jungle knives. We sat and honed those, drinking beer, until mine was so sharp I could shave the hair on my hand. We weren't going to kill anybody with it, but you know, in case you ever came down in a parachute in a jungle, you'd have to cut your parachute loose sometimes, and you want to have a knife with you. Mm-hmm. So I still have the knife that I carried on every trip across the hump.
All right. Okay.
So then, well, the next morning, after we'd been sharpening our knives and drinking beer, the next morning we had to fall out about daybreak by the C-46 loaded with mail sacks. I had such a hangover, I didn't know whether I could stand there and do it. I gritted my teeth and I said, they're not going to leave me behind, I'm going to go. We went. And I gradually recovered through the day. They had box lunches for us, and we stretched out on mail sacks. Mail sacks kept us warm. They were full of letters to the GIs overseas. They were very passionate, and they were quite warm. So we I watched out of the window the gray corduroy of the Atlantic, landed in Bermuda to gas up. Beautiful, spring-like flowers out. I could have stayed there. Mm-hmm. Gassed up. Next stop was the Azores. Gassed up there. Then the next stop was Casablanca, where we stayed overnight. And they said when we got off the plane, don't go in the native quarter. GIs have gone in the native quarter and have never been heard from again. So stay out of it. Mm-hmm. So we were very careful to stay out of it. I noticed one thing over there, the public restrooms. The restroom is nothing but a room, an empty room, with a hole in one corner and two footprints in front of it to show you where to put your feet. That's the restroom.
Yeah, well, kind of French style.
And Casablanca, all white houses. And from the air, it looks that way. But when you get down in there, they're not all that way.
All right. So you have just the overnight there. Casablanca, what's the next stop?
Next stop was Libya, in the halls of Montezuma. And that was before Gaddafi. And we stopped there and delivered mail. We stopped at Iran, Abidan Airport, and delivered mail. And I can remember when we took off from Abidan, it was about 100 degrees there, and we all poked our nose out of the airplane. don't want to get out in that sun. So we stayed in the airplane, gassed up, took off, and as we cleared the fence, the pilot was bringing up the gear, the engines popped. He hollered back, "Don't worry, it's just heat vapor. The carburetor's vapor lock." And the next stop was Karachi, which is now in Pakistan. And we stayed there for, we processed this for a couple, 3 weeks. And I went and got some Karachi boots made, which was, you had to have Karachi boots. You go to this little shop, and here's a little guy with a sheet, wearing a sheet, and chewing betel nut, spitting out of the door. His mouth is all red, and he says, "Stand there." So we stand on a brown paper, and he traces our feet around. He says, "Come back next week." Next week we came back and had the nicest pair of boots, soft leather, fit perfectly. And then we finally got on a plane and went up into Sookerating, India, which is way up in the Assam Valley. And there was where I started flying the hump with the old timers. And believe me, it was an education.
Yeah, what kind of reception did you get? You arrive at the base there, how were you treated or what happens?
We were treated well, but not officiously.
Okay.
And one of the first things I drew was Officer of the Day. I said, "Well, what do I got to do?" And the lieutenant said, "Well, you put on your best looking khakis. We put the armband on you. Wear your sidearm." I had been issued a .45 caliber and ammunition and so on. And that's another story, because I'd never fired it. I didn't know what it was like. So one day I was sitting in the tent, and I realized it's very damp up there, and things have a chance to mold. So I better clean that piece. So I got it out, and I disassembled it, took out those, made sure there was none in the pipe, took it all apart, dried it, oiled it, put it back together again, jacked one up in the chamber, bang, it went off right out the door. And a native kid was making our beds, and he went, I just put it back in my holster. I didn't let him know how it scared me as much as it did him. But I said, aha, it's got a hair trigger. So I never carried it around in the chamber, and I never fired it in anger or self-defense or anything. Got down in Burma 3 months later. I thought, I want to have that thing cleaned again, but I don't want to take a chance on it. So I went down to the armament shop, and one of the corporals in there, I says, "Corporal," I said, "would you clean and oil my piece for me?" He says, "Yeah, Lieutenant, I'll do it." You know, like, oh, this guy doesn't even know how to clean his own gun. He took it apart, dried it, oiled it, put the magazine, jacked it up in the chamber, blam! There's a hole right in the floor. And it just so happened our commanding officer was standing in front of him. He turned around and looked and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "That's why I didn't want to clean it."
Okay, let's go back to the first period there when you're in India. Do you remember the first flight that you took out of there?
Yeah. An old guy named Frank. Oh, he must have been 35 years old, just old man. And he said, "We're going to go over to Luliang and up to Chengdu." I know China is so big, it goes from the Arctic to the tropics. It's hard to fathom how big China is. So we took this load of gas up to Chengdu for the B-29s. And we picked up a load of conscripts, Chinese coolies, who were being taken back to India to be trained for the first Chinese army. They were the most scruffy looking. Odd. They probably picked them up off of opium dens and off the streets, and here they were. And so Frank says, "Would you like to see some new country?" And I said, "Yeah." I says, "Well, we made a dogleg up here." He says, "We'll cut across back to Sookerating." He says, "We're going to go over some uncharted territory." So we were flying at about 23,000 feet and almost scraping the tops of the peaks. Looked down in the dark, dark valleys down there in a river, another snow-capped peak, another valley. I was just in awe. And I found out that day why we always checked out a Thompson submachine gun when we took a trip. Frank says to we had a radio operator, 2 pilots and a radio operator. He said to the radio operator, lock that door back into the cabin. He says, and he set the Thompson right there. He says, if anybody unlocks that door and comes through there, use it. The radio operator was younger than I was. He said, I don't know. So I got up to altitude, and Frank says, go back and check our cargo, see if they're all right. Don't want any trouble. So I unlocked the door and opened it. The smell of vomit. And here these guys all sprawled out all over in there, like that, out cold. You know, they had never seen an airplane. Some of them had never seen a white person. And here they were. I bet they were scared out of their wits. Well, we cut across that dog leg, back to Sookerating, landed, and we were met by a Chinese lieutenant, 1st Chinese Army, spit and polish, arrogant. He said, get these men out here. He got them all into a truck. The sorriest looking bunch of guys you ever saw. He took them away to be trained, and I'll bet you that in probably 6 months, they went back over to fight the Japanese, and I'll bet they were spit and polish then.
All right. About how many missions did you fly out of India, do you think?
I don't know. I've lost track. There were 3 conditions. Now, is this all right? Just to went like this. Either really west wind, sometimes 120 knots. Boy, we go booming over the hump, beating our ETA, all a howl. Coming back, we had to nurse our engines, cut back on the mixture for fear we'd run out of gas before we got there. That's one condition. Next one was absolute quiet. The hump would be just really silent. You just see it in all its glory, all those mountains. And we're coming back in the afternoon, and Frank said, I'm a little worried. I said, why? Well, he said, when it's this quiet, he said, very often ground fog forms in the Assam Valley, and I hope we get back before it does. So, okay. Well, when we take drums of gas, load aviation gas over, they would also drain down our tanks and leave us just enough to fly home on, because those planes were starved for gas over there. Well, we got back to, came over Lido Pass, back into the Assam Valley, and Frank says, check the gas tanks. I'm checking, boy, they're bouncing on empty, they're getting low. He said, call our base. So I called in for landing instructions. They said, sorry, we're below minimums. We've got ground fog. You'll have to go down to the next one. So Frank says, okay, we'll go to Melonberry. So we went down to the next one. By the time we got down there and I called them, he said, sorry, we're below minimums. You better go down to the next one, which was Jarhat. Got down there and the guy, tower operator says, sorry, we're below minimums. You can't land. I said, can't we take a chance on it? No, he says, absolutely not. Frank says, all right, head out over open country. We'll put it on autopilot, put it in a gentle climb. You get your parachute straps fastened, I'll fasten mine. We'll bail out. So I did that. He said, all right, now you fly while I'm doing mine. I don't remember what the operator was doing. I think he was chewing his fingernails.
Probably.
And at that time, Jarhat Tower comes in and says, our number, if you're still in, can hear me, we're just right at minimums now. If you want to try a landing, it's at pilot's discretion. That means if you pilot it up, it's your baby.
Right.
Turned around, Frank said, okay, we're going in. Oh, we strained our eyes down through this cotton wool fog, just following a radio compass. That's all we had. We didn't have ILS over there. And finally, about 100 feet off the ground, we broke out. And that was the landing strip. We both relaxed.
Okay.
The third one
Yep.
was storms. These thunderstorms would build up over the hump, sometimes to 50 or 60,000 feet, and we had to fly through them. You can't get around them. You got to fly through them. That was the third and the worst kind.
What happens? Does the plane get struck by lightning as you go through, or?
Well, I'm not sure whether we were struck by lightning, but one time, a friend of mine, John, and I took a load of gas over, and we were coming back. This was when I was down at Myitkyina. We were flying C-46s. We're coming back, and all of a sudden I noticed some blue fire playing along the edges of the wings, and then blue fire around the props, and all of a sudden blue fire snapping, cracking. I reached out and touched the gyro compass, and a fat spark jumped. I said, John, what's that? He says, it's St. Elmo's fire. Guys on ships have seen that phenomenon. But it's in a quiet snowstorm, no turbulence, nothing, just as quiet, and just all this jumping around. But it never hurt us any. Finally, then it quit, and we were out of it.
Okay. While you were in India, I mean, what kind of facility do you have? What was the base like?
We lived in tents around a tea planter's bungalow. Now, this is big tea plantations up there. And the nearest thing I can think is that those tea plants are a lot like blueberry bushes. They grow sort of like that. And all these natives pick the leaves. They got big picking bags like the cotton bags they pick in down south. And they take them in and dry them in sheds. And that's the tea that everybody drinks. And especially in England. Over in India and all their places that are English influenced, everything stops at 4 o'clock and they have tea. And the tea companies smile. So anyway, this tea planter had a bungalow there. And we lived in tents around it. And we ate our meal, in the basement of the tea planter's bungalow at long tables. We had Hindu waiters, young people, and I was very aware of the fact that their customs are so much different from ours. A lot of animals are sacred to them, and the cow is a sacred animal to them. And I always felt bad they'd serve us beef stew, and I wondered, what must they think when they're serving up beef stew to these foreigners?
I mean, did you have much contact or interaction with the locals, or
No.
just the ones who worked on base a little bit?
No contact whatsoever. We didn't even go off the. I got off the base one time. When I first got there, I wanted to see what the little town looked like. So I went into town and I thought, I ought to have my picture taken. So I saw a photographer's shop, and here's this kid standing there. I said, come here. I said, want your picture taken? He said, I hauled out some money. Picture? Yeah. So he took the money, he came in, and I had a picture taken with me in the studio with this kid standing beside me, and it's in that book. So you'll see it when you look at it. And I sent that home to Marion. And but that's the only time I ever got into town, I think.
Okay. And did you encounter any British personnel, or were they just all Americans where you were?
Oh yes, we've encountered, very often we'd run into the British. I might mention one thing. Some of our guys were out wandering around the countryside one day, and they ran into a native cartography crew. They were mapping. And this may be apocryphal, I don't know. But anyway, the story they told was that they said, what's the name of that town there? It's no name on it. It's just a little bitty town. And one of the GIs says, I don't know, they're a bunch of poor dumb bastards. And they put that in the map, Dumbastapur. And supposedly, you look in Upper Assam Valley, there's a little town named Dumbastapur. I can't vouch for that.
All right. So basically, you're in India then for about 3 months, and then from there you go into Burma.
I think they took some of us who were the least important to the machine they were running there, like me, 20 years old and new guy, you know.
Yeah.
And they sent us down to Myitkyina, Burma. Now that's not pronounced the way it's spelled.
Yeah, I actually know how it's spelled.
Myitkyina.
Yep.
Myitkyina.
Yep.
They just taken it from the Japanese. They sent us in to set up an operations office so it could be a way station for planes to stop on the way across the hump. I can remember there was still a Jap Betty bomber lying off the end of the runway when we got there. When they were enlarging the tent area, they had a big caterpillar there, and they uncovered a body, Japanese soldier wrapped in bandages, so he'd been in a field hospital. And also we had supposedly the shortest bombing mission on record in Burma. We had a squadron of P-47s at the other end of our field, and they'd take off with wing bombs. And they said they just got the field back from the Japanese. This guy loaded his wing bombs on, took off, pulled up his gear, dropped the bombs, put his gear down, came around and landed. But as time went on, they went farther and farther and farther down. The Japs were on the run, and they knew it.
Now, about roughly when did this happen? When did you get over to Burma?
It's after Christmas in 1945.
Or, well, after Christmas 44, so or like early 45.
Christmas 44, New Year's 45. Right. That's about the time we went down there. And I stayed there until after the war ended.
All right. Now, how was life at that base different from what you've been doing before?
Well, it was different because there's nothing there. We lived in tents, British Army tents, and I must say they're pretty good because they have 2 layers. They have a fly that goes over it so that you don't get wet. And they're nice tents. And we started, we hired a native crew to build us a decent hut. They're called a basha. And thatched roof and all. So they were putting up the framework and thatching the roof, and they had the ridge poles, and the crew was working there. And I'd gotten this jungle knife about this long. I was quite proud of having it, and I guy up in there says, "Knife, hatchet, machete." I said, "Just a minute, I got one." I went and got my prized possession, handed it up to him, and he whacked away at the bamboo ridgepole and turned the edge. Says, "No good." Threw it down. They finished the hut, but we never got moved in. The war ended. But we would have had a nice hut to live in if it stayed longer.
Okay. Now, were you still flying missions over the hump from there?
Oh, yeah. At first, not very many, because we didn't have that many airplanes. But as I look back on it, I made a friend in operations, and I didn't even know it, a sergeant named Stash, because he had a big luxuriant mustache. And he'd been over there for 2 or 3 years. He was almost around to bend. But he was a nice guy, and I liked him. And whenever we'd come back from a trip, we had a big, what they called a lister bag, hundreds of gallons of water with spigots all around it, and they drew water out of the Irrawaddy River, filled that, and then laced it with chlorine so we wouldn't get sick. And we filled our canteens from that. Well, chlorine water like that is not fun to drink. So what we do, we take our canteens, when we take off, we'd set them back by the cargo door, because there was always a breeze coming through there, and below 0, it'd get cold. So when you come back, guys always say, "Hey, got a cold canteen?" I gave mine to Stash. And, you know, I look back on it now, he gave me some favorable trips. He gave me some fine trips that were like up and down the valley, slow timing a new engine, carrying mail somewhere, doing that, and I think it was because of Stash. And one day I was in the operations office, and the captain, who's the head of operations, said, "Anybody here checked out in the C-47? Nobody moved. You don't volunteer for anything. He said, "Anybody want to get checked out in the C-47? I raised my hand. So, "Okay, Davis, come with me." Came out, we got in the C-47, he says, "Here's the auxiliary, here's the throttles, there's the mixture control. Now you're checked out, you're going on a trip with the colonel this afternoon as a co-pilot." Well, that led to a trip that was almost my undoing, because we flew back to a party. he wanted to go to back in India. I'm not going to say much about him except he was a boy wonder. Very young for his rank. We got to the party, and of course I didn't go to the party, I wasn't invited. I found a bachelor officer's quarters and sat and shot the bull with other pilots about what? Flying the hump. So next morning he was ready to go back to our base, red-eyed, smelling of strong drink, and horribly hungover. And he got up, he didn't even talk to me. Davis, call the tower for clearance to take off. I called the tower, and the tower operator says, pilot's discretion, we got a really bad front coming through. And I looked, and it was coming in from the west. It was low, the clouds were green, you know that look? And I said, Colonel, he said, tell him we're leaving. Tower operator says, pilot's discretion. I said, the colonel says we're going. We took off into that, and we turned into it, and we were both standing on the controls. That plane was bucking and jumping up and down. Finally, we broke out on top, and the sweat was on his forehead. He leaned, pushed the seat back, and went to sleep. We got back to our home base, and there was an overcast there. Are you running out of tape?
I am. So probably press pause right here. So we'll make sure to get that. All right, you were talking about coming back with this colonel after his trip.
Okay, so we got back to our base at Myitkyina, called Fox Charlie, and there was an overcast. And here we look, and here were planes circling, 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 clear up to about 10,000 feet, waiting to be let down through the overcast and land. So we flew in, got in the top, you shuttle back and forth, 3 minutes, time turn, 3 minutes, time turn, back and forth, and the colonel was starting to turn green again, and the sweat was popping out in his forehead. He says, Davis, call the tower and tell him I want to land now. So I said, tower, this is, I gave the number. Colonel Thornquist says he wants to land right now. Yes, sir. Pull out of the pattern and go down to 1,000 feet or whatever. So we did, came in underneath everybody, and he landed. And we went our way. He staggered off to his tent to nurse his hangover, and I went home, and I thought, up there above that overcast, those guys are still going back and forth, and they're saying, RHIP, rank has its privilege.
Yep.
And that bothered me. That bothered me.
All right. You said you had another story to...
Yeah, the worst trip I ever made. Got to the point that all these old guys I was flying with, they taught me all the tricks they knew, or most of them, and then I flew half the time. One pilot would fly one way, and the other pilot would fly the other way. So this one, John Heatherton and I, he was about my best friend. He was a very experienced pilot. He had been delivering P-39s to the Russians up in Alaska. He was what they call a service pilot. He didn't go through cadet training, but was commissioned right from civilian life and to go into the Air Transport Command. He was a lightning pilot. So anyway, we started off with a load of drums of 100-octane gas, and John flew over, and we got up to altitude, and he said, go back and check if we got any leakers. Well, I did that, and so I went back and looked at all the drums of gas were all tied down, no leakers. He said, okay, we can smoke. So we light a cigarette, and then all of a sudden we felt a little tremor go through the plane. And then the plane. John says, I'm going to take it off autopilot. Pretty soon it was bucking and jumping, and we were getting into going across the first, and the thunderstorms were building. Well, we had some pretty wild ride going over there, but we landed. They took all the drums of gas, loaded us with empties for the return trip. John says, okay, you fly home. Okay, so I got in the left seat, took off in a blinding rainstorm, and about 3,000 feet it turned to ice. We got up to altitude. It says, okay, here we go. And the propellers had de-icer on them. And you punch a button and send de-icer fluid along and sling ice off the props. And you could tell one of our hump ships had dents all on both sides of the cabins from the ice being slung off. So we were getting iced up. And I can't remember whether we had de-icer boots in the wings or not. They didn't always work the best anyway. So we were about 15,000 feet. Up, down, down, and you're up again, down. I'd give it full throttle and climb. And finally I said, John, the controls are getting mushy. We're picking up ice. He said, well, what are you going to do? He wasn't going to tell me. So what are you going to do? I says, I'm going to leave our altitude and get out of this. He said, okay. So slowly, gradually, we climbed. We had the cockpit lights on because of the constant lightning flashes. You couldn't see the instruments otherwise. So we climbed slowly, 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 less and less. Finally broke out in the moonlight. And I looked back and here's this big wall of thunderstorms behind us that we'd come through. And we were just a flying ball of ice. Mm-hmm. John says, okay, you're clear now, you're all right. Ice started to dry up, fall off. We flew home. You know, if you fly on top of an overcast and the moon is out, do look at your moon shadow on the clouds and it'll be surrounded by a rainbow. Mm-hmm. And we got home. I let down through the overcast. We checked in, got our debriefed. We had to go through a debriefing, and our debriefing officer was a burned out navigator who'd been in combat. He had the shakes really bad, but he's a neat guy. I liked him very much. I guess one time I was walking down the flight line and he called me from an empty hut there. He says, Davis, come over here. I come over, he says, what? He says, I got a bottle of olives from home. He says, they're no fun to eat by yourself. He says, come in and sit down. We sat and we ate that whole bottle of olives. He says, I had to share them with somebody, but it didn't, not the whole crew. So anyway, he would debrief us. We'd get 2 shots of medical whiskey and go up to the mess hall. And by that time, your stomach would be warm. You eat pancakes and powdered eggs. So anyway, we came home, got down, got debriefed by the navigator, went into the mess hall and sat down. The cooks made us some pancakes. John looked at me, he says, well, he says, you think you've been initiated now? I says, yeah, I think I have. And that was the worst trip I ever had. It was just iffy. The last trip I never knew I took. It was a good trip. Went over on top of an overcast, offloaded. I saw a friend of mine from cadet days, came in with another load. I saw his tousled head of blonde hair, and I hollered at him. Boy, it was like old home week. We visited for a few minutes, got our load of empty drums and started back. I flew back, and I had to let down through the overcast. I felt like I'd reached the point that I knew what I was doing. And we landed, and the next day I got a bug. Some kind of, I don't know, dengue fever, malaria, something. They took me right off flight status. I ran a slight fever, and they had me there for, he says, you're off for 30 days. Flight surgeon was a friend of ours. He said, no flying, 30 days. Meanwhile, the war ended. And that night, we got the news. Everybody started firing their sidearms and rifles and machine guns, and just, I dropped down on the floor of the tent one time. I was afraid bullets were coming through the tent. So the next morning, hot flash from headquarters, everybody turned in their sidearms. I was glad to get rid of that thing with the hair trigger.
How long did you have to stay in Burma before they moved you out?
Well, I stooged around there for a month, and probably about in September, they cut orders for me to go to the hospital in Calcutta. And they sent me down there. I went on sick call every day. They said, slight fever, allergies. They sent me home.
Okay.
And it was monotonous. The war was over. Guys were going home. And here I was going on sick call every day. So finally I got my courage up. I dressed my best Class A uniform. And I requested permission to talk to the commanding officer of the hospital. So I walked in. Here's this old colonel sitting there. And he says, Lieutenant Davis, stand at ease. So you don't stand at ease. Parade rest.
Yeah.
He says, what do you want? I said, I've been on sick call here for a month now. Please, either send me back to duty or send me home. He tipped back like that for a while. He says, I'm going to send you home. I could have jumped straight up down, but I contained myself. I snapped, yes, sir. And about a week later, I was on a hospital ship headed back for the USA.
Okay. And how long did that take?
30 days crossing the Atlantic in one of the worst storms.
Atlantic or the Pacific?
Atlantic.
Okay, so you
Came
flew.
back. We came up through the Indian Ocean, Red Sea,
Okay.
Suez Canal, Mediterranean, beautiful. We were basking in the sun out on deck on this hospital ship. We hit the Straits of Gibraltar, and out there was an angry ocean with a storm coming. And this is a big hospital ship. We got in such a storm, up and down, and the screws would come out of water and bang, and one of our guys, they each issued each of us a life belt that you pop a CO2 cartridge and it would inflate. So one guy in my group says, look, I got a hole in this life belt as big as a mouse hole. So I'm going to find out about that. He went out and he collared the first ship's officer he saw. He said, sir, look at this. What are you going to do about that? The officer said, son, that water is so cold and so wild and so wet that with a good life belt on, you wouldn't last 15 minutes anyway. So don't worry about it. Boy.
Well, that's reassuring.
And one night during that storm, the crockery slid out of the kitchens and on the floor, and one of the anchors came loose and banged against the hull. And the next morning, all was quiet, but it's still. I got up and says, anybody going to breakfast? No, I'm not hungry. I was in the stateroom with a bunch of colonels. We had our bunks that let down from the wall. And I said, okay, I'm going to go eat. So I went to the mess hall, walked in. There's nobody there. And they had tables with a little board on the edge that you could pull up and make it so the plates wouldn't. They had those up. I got my food, hot biscuits. The Navy eats well. And went and sat down and hooked my leg around the table leg so I wouldn't slide, and ate my breakfast and wondered where everybody else was. I'd never been airsick in my life, and I never got seasick either. I'm just lucky that way, because most of the guys were just out of it.
All right. So where do you come into the States then? Where do
New
you
York.
Okay.
We watched the Statue of Liberty come up out of the ocean. And we were met by the Salvation Army, who gave us a donut and a little carton of milk. The first milk I'd had since I left the United States. First donut, too.
All right. And now do you get discharged right away, or have you got
Well,
to
they
wait,
sent me to a hospital in Indiana, and home on leave. I was still sick. The doctors looked me over and says, well, Lieutenant, how do you feel? I said, I feel great. I didn't. But it's all right, 30 days. Then come back here and we'll decide your case. So I went home. When I got home, my folks looked at me, took one look at me. I weighed 143 pounds. My skin was yellow from the Adabrin, and I was coughing. And my dad says, you got to see a doctor. He says, there's a new doctor right down across in the park. He just got out of the Air Force, flight surgeon. Go down and see him. I said, okay. So I did. It was Dr. Carl Boothby, who became a good friend of ours.
I worked for him
And
for years.
I worked for him as an office nurse for years. He delivered all of our children, you know, and just a great guy. So I went in, and he said, "Well, you are sick, aren't you?" And he said, "Drop your trousers and lean over that gurney." So I did, and he pumped me with a penicillin with a barrel about that big and about that long. He says, "That ought to fix you up." Back in those days, penicillin would cure anything. So I got my pants back up. He says, "Sit down." So I sat down and talked, and he told me he was a flight surgeon over in North Africa and wanted to know about flying the hump, and we swapped war stories. And I got ready to go. I said, "Well, Doc," I says, "I really like this. It's been fun. How much do I owe you?" And he says, "How long are you home for?" 30 days. Keep your money. You're going to need it. And that was the beginning of our friendship.
All right. Now, did the penicillin help at all?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
About a day or two, I was feeling fine. Now, ever after that, we got married, and Marion was working in his office then. About every few months, I'd get the drop. And I was still yellow. At night, my pillowcase would be stained yellow, and she'd have to do the laundry then. And she'd look at me and she'd say,
Perspired so profusely.
she'd say, "I think you need to go and see Dr. Boothby again." He'd pump me full of penicillin again. And after that, a few months, it finally lessened, until it was gone. And it left me with a nice set of allergies.
All right. Now, did you have to go back down to see the Army doctor again to...
Yeah,
Oh,
she-
yeah. Went back down, and Marion and my sister and her boyfriend, who was a friend of mine, all went down. We got my folks' car, and we went down, and they took me back. And I had to stay there for, I don't know, a week or two.
Yeah.
Then
couple
they
weeks.
sent me to Great Lakes to get separated. Interesting. When I got back there, I walked in the barracks. These are all guys that just back from all over, combat and everywhere. And I put my stuff down, and I get a bed, and here's some enlisted men over there. They started making little snide remarks. And I'm going to put some officers in here. Good grief. We've had enough of that chicken. Finally, I got him. I walked over in front of him. I said, "Now look, guys, the war's over. I'm not a lieutenant anymore. I'm getting out. You're getting out. Let's just be friends. No rank, nothing here. Okay." And after that, they were all right.
All right. Now, once you were out...
What?
Once you were out of the service then, what do you do in terms of going on with your life? I mean, you get married.
Well, I got to tell you about that. You know, when you go through a war, I don't care how hard it's been or how easy. And I know many guys in the war had it a lot worse than I did. I really didn't have it that bad. But there's something about war that brutalizes you. And when you come home, you're really not fit to be a civilian again. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's just, you're kind of lost. And Marion sensed that. We were, I guess, let me put it this way. A famous singer, what was her name, had a song, "Good Morning Heartache, Walk Right In." Well, you know, so many guys we know had that happen when they came home from war. You know, you're over there and you think, "Oh, if the war would only end, things will be perfect." And back home they say, "Oh, if the war will ever end and he gets back home, things will be perfect." But we got back home and things weren't perfect. And a lot of my friends said that, "Good morning, heartache." Luckily, we didn't. We stayed together. We've been married 68 years now. And she sweated me out through thick and thin. And when they were going to take me back for Korea, she says, "I sweated you out through one more. Don't do it again." And a friend of mine, John, the guy I mentioned, he was from Minnesota, and he wanted me to come up there, and he had a scheme for buying some war surplus Norseman seaplanes and flying hunting and fishing parties into the lakes of Minnesota. He said, "We make a lot of money." And Marion says, I don't really want you to do that. No. And I got my commercial pilot's license when I got out. And I found out by taking a 10-hour refresher course, I could get my commercial single-engine land pilot's license. So we had an airport here then at Hartford. Claire Leach owned it. He was the GM dealer here in Hartford. And both of his sons were in service, and one of them was a friend of mine. But anyway, so I went out, took 10 hours, got my commercial pilot's license. So I used to tool around here a little bit. I took off one day, and it's the first time I ever realized that Hartford is in like a bowl. And you get that perspective from when you get up in the air. Well, so I flew out towards the Kling Farms, which are out southwest. Marion was home. I didn't know it, but she was sick in bed. So I had this little plane. I don't remember what it was, Taylor Crafts. I flew out over their house.
Between the house and barn.
And when they heard the engine, her two brothers came out running. Well, I gave it full throttle, and I came right down through between the house and the barn. And statute of limitations, I hope, has taken hold by now. And pull up in a nice chandelle, and the kids were waving their arms, and Marion was inside in bed hollering, "Get back in here before that crazy fool breaks his neck and we can't get married." And I didn't even know she was in bed, so I went back, landed. She later told me about it.
Okay. Now, did you go to college eventually?
Well, yeah, I had enough GI Bill. Now that was a lifesaver, I'll admit it, because I finally decided, well, Mary and I decided I had to do something. I was in a nothing job, and so
I kind of pushed him.
Yes, she did. I enrolled in Western Michigan University. She got out of nurse's training, started working for a doctor here, and I drove back and forth. We got married. For the first semester I lived over there, I had enough GI Bill that it took me clear through my bachelor's degree, halfway through my master's degree. And when we retired, moved back here from Ann Arbor, I decided I had to get back to be Bud Davis again. I was not going to be a professor. I was writing a column now for the Tri-City Record, and you don't get stuff. People don't tell you stuff if they think you're too fancy. So we got back, and people asked me, say one time says, "Bud," I went back to being Bud Davis. "Bud, what are all those letters behind your name?" Marion says, "Well, the BS is obvious. MS is more of the same, and PhD is piled higher and deeper." "Oh, okay." Fern Wilkinson came along delivering mail. We just moved back. I was out raking the yard in front. Vern was a couple, 3 years younger. He was a mailman. He had this big mail sack on him. He's back, walking down the street, sorting letters. He gets one, and he looks over at me, and he goes on. "Vern, you got a letter for me?" "No." I said, "You have to. Let's see it." Well, he says, "I got a letter here for Dr. Roy M. Davis, but that's not you." I said, "That's me. Give me my letter." And Mary's aunt and uncle came up from Elkhart, visit us, and he stopped at the standard station down here in the corner and says, "I'm looking for Roy M. Davis." I said, "Nobody by that name around here." He says, "We got a Bud Davis, lives right down the street here." So that's the way it's been ever since. And you know, and all the time I've been writing a feature column for the Tri-City Record ever since then. I'm still doing it, and it's been more years than I care to mention.
30.
35? 30. I don't know. Well, anyway, people give stories to Bud Davis. And I had a whole network of old people. The editor, Carl Baer, said, "Bud, I want a column in the paper with a Hartford slant." "Okay, I'll try it." Now he says, "Don't do it unless you're willing to stick with it." So I thought, well, I'll try it for a year. I've been at it ever since. And all these people used to give me stories. They're all gone.
You're off of the
Now
war
I guess
now.
I'm the story.
I guess so.
We're the story.
Yeah. Now, what did you get your degrees in?
What?
What did you get your degrees in?
Okay. Master's degree.
You had 2 degrees.
What?
You had 2 degrees.
3.
Oh.
Bachelor of Science. I originally wanted to be an engineer. So I discovered something interesting after I got in college. I didn't do that well in math. I did very well in literature and art, which is my field. And there was a glut of engineers after World War II. Everybody wanted to be an engineer.
Yep.
So we talked it over. I had to give it a good think. I was a sophomore. What am I going to do? I said, well, I'm going to decide on the basis of what do I have the most fun with? Art and literature. I took so many Shakespeare courses at Western that Dr. Brown, head of the department, when I'd come in for another class, he'd look over his glasses and see, well, I see Lord Davis is with us again.
Yes.
So I became an English teacher. And I've not regretted it.
You also did industrial arts drafting.
Yeah, I was also, I taught drafting for a while. That's as close as I got to engineering. But anyway, in 1977, I decided my students should be writing journals. Somebody at the University of Michigan told me about this. So I said, okay. So I started my students. I had to keep a journal, every one of them. And then I thought, well, if they're going to do it, maybe I should too. Well, here are my journals.
Okay. That's
2.5 shelves. I'm on 125 now. That's since 1977. I'm still writing my column weekly for the Tri-City Record. And, books are my life. I got another wall of books upstairs just like this one.
And over there's one. And these are 2 and 3 deep.
That's philosophy and history over
There's
there.
some flat. And the other one's up and down.
Did you just
Oh,
teach?
that's still going, isn't it?
Did you just teach high school, or did you teach college too?
Both. I started at Waterville High School, went to St. Joe High School, taught in Lake Michigan College, taught in the University of Michigan, and I trained student teachers for them. I went back, moved to Ann Arbor so I could get my PhD. I got a job at the high school, Pioneer High School, which is,
First we went out
Premier.
to Yale.
yeah, we had a year out at Yale, which gave me a good start on the PhD. And then I decided, I got this job at Pioneer High School, and the director of curriculum said, now, Roy, you know, everybody comes here to go to graduate school at the University of Michigan. You can't start any graduate classes for the first year you're teaching here. I said, okay. I left there and went right down and enrolled in the campus. And simultaneously got my PhD in teaching literature and preparation of English teachers. That's my real specialty, preparing English teachers. And they took advantage of that because I always had student teachers up the wazoo, and I didn't let them teach for me, but I taught them how to teach, and then I let them do some teaching, and I enjoyed that part of it. But I went back to the Pioneer High School because, believe it or not, I couldn't get a job in college that would pay as much as they were paying me.
It can happen.
That can happen. We had a marvelous life over there. All of our kids went through school over there. And we moved back here in 1982, and we've been here ever since.
All right. Now, I guess you had mentioned here that we wanted to bring in Marion a little bit and have her fill in some pieces of the story, which I'm perfectly happy to do.
Actually, she was property of the government. You tell them about that.
Adjust here.
Have you got that off?
Not at the moment. Did you want? It's actually we're on, if that's okay.
Okay.
One of the things. Let's see. Talk to us just a little bit about your own background. I mean, he filled in a part of it already. But you mentioned that you went into nurses training.
Yes.
Explain a little bit about what that was and how that worked.
Okay, when I was a little girl, my cousin was a nurse, and we'd be visiting there, and she'd come home in that a white outfit and that hat. And I thought, I'd like to be a nurse. So I took Latin and those different classes that prepared me for what the requirements were to enter nurses training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then a friend of mine from church was going at St. Joseph's down in South Bend, Indiana. And I was debating between Nazareth and Kalamazoo and South Bend. I thought, I've never been to South Bend much. I think I'd like to go there. So I applied, and my father and mom were the cadet nurse program. Is it recording?
Yes.
The cadet nurse program had just started, and but my mom and dad had paid the tuition for the first year. Well, my roommate was from Michigan City, Indiana, and a sorority or some group, a women's group, sponsored her with a scholarship. So then we were the only two that weren't cadet nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So Sister Cecilian said, we would like our school to be 100% cadet nurse. And of course that we were government property then, and had same rules and regulations. Sometimes I think we had the same menus. But anyway, so I talked over with my folks, and Daddy said, well, you know, you are the oldest in the family, and so, and the boys are younger, so if you would like to do that, we will sign off our part, and then say it's okay for you. So anyway, in September we went and enrolled, started our first day in the dorm, and a couple of days later they said we could go home for the weekend because they weren't quite prepared for us. And so we came back, and we were only there about a month, or maybe not quite a month, when they sent us downstairs to witness an autopsy. Well, that was a complete autopsy. And then we come up to eat, and they got stewed tomatoes.
Oh.
So anyway, needless to say, within about 10 days, about 4 or 5 girls decided that wasn't for them. And so anyway, then that started my nursing career, and we were issued uniforms, cadet uniforms. We had our winter ones, which were of wool, and our emblems that we had on our lapel, on our, what do you call those things?
Epaulets.
Epaulets.
The
And
government paid them just like a buck private.
and we were
About as
paid
much.
$15 a month. And
Can I tell them about meeting Sister C?
not yet.
Okay.
Anyway, then the next thing was a lineup. And they were the old uniforms because they weren't making many new uniforms during the war. So when a graduate class left, then and they were bigger classes. Now, we all lined up, and they had to be 13 inches off the floor. Well, whatever. So when you stood together, you looked alike. Then we were first probies. They caught us for 6 months. And we took classes, and we also did making beds. And back then, you cleaned IV tubes, you cleaned syringes, you cleaned bedpans.
They had an autoclave you could walk in.
Yeah, and then a little later, the first year, 6 months I was there, I was doing general duty on the medical floor. And back then, you didn't have nursing homes, so you had a lot of deaths. And undertakers didn't come in the middle of the night or when they first died, so you prepared the patient and took it down to the morgue, so that was different. That was a little scary. But anyway, I had developed some back problems and had to go into Chicago to Dr. Burkheiser, a specialist, and I had to wear a back brace, something about my vertebrae and stuff. But anyway, I was determined that I was not going to quit. I had never been a quitter, and I wasn't going to quit. And Sister Cecilian would have maybe liked to have had me, but on the other hand, she didn't want me to because of the fact that she didn't want any more dropouts out of the Cadet Nurse Corps. Then, after I was there a year, we were put on nights, and we'd have one supervisor, and she was a lady that was a maiden lady and older, but scared to death. She wanted us to do things that she wouldn't even do. Now I had signed up that if I went into this service, I'd probably go into the Navy for two reasons. One is my daddy had been in, but the other is I didn't want to be overseas somewhere. And at that point, the naval ships were not too far offshore.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, then we got leave, just like the guys in the service. The only thing I don't know about them, but we were supposed to work 7 days and get the 8th day off. And we worked 7.5 days and got a half a day off on 8th day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then in the meantime, we were always happy when summer came because we didn't have classes. But in the wintertime, if you were on nights, then you were supposed to report to breakfast at 7 o'clock, on duty before 8. I think we had to be at breakfast earlier than that. But anyway, but then you're supposed to go to classes and study. Well, how are you going to study, go to class, and all that? So your days were just all split up.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily we were young girls and take it. Well, then we had a flu epidemic go through. And we had to work in the laundry, too, because a lot of the laundry people were having trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the bags to put contaminated
Right.
stuff in. Things were so different. But we were a Catholic hospital, and the other hospital in South Bend was Methodist. And we got together and we decided that it wasn't just the nuns, it was rules and regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So we always said we were in prison with invisible bars.
Right.
You had to be in bed at a certain time, and you had to be to eat at a certain time. And then when your vacations weren't called vacations, they were called leaves. And then the last year in training, they didn't let us take a vacation. We had to take it at the very end. And
Terminal leave.
that was our terminal leave.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some you couldn't count that as days as nursing. You had to count terminal leave, and during that time you could do no nursing until your full 3 years. I missed a half a day one time, and I had to make it up.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't count that we worked overtime,
Right.
more than that. But in the meantime, when Bud came home on leave, we got back together again, and that
Just
was
fortunate. We just happened to be home on leave at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was you who remarked sometime later, it's a good thing we got together because if we'd married other people, we probably would have ruined 2 marriages later.
yeah, because I really never did.
And I want to tell them about the first time I met Sister Cecilia.
Okay.
All right, Bud.
We'd gotten back together, we're dating again, we were both home on leave. I went down to see her before I had to go back. So they had this day room, it's like a big living room where they could entertain.
On the main floor where her office, you could see.
So
us.
we were in there sitting talking, and in comes Sister Cecilia, beads swinging,
Her rosary.
Mm-hmm.
and right over to us, Marion says, "Sister, I'd like to have you meet a friend of mine from Hartford, Bud Davis." And she held out her hand and says, "Oh, pleased to meet you. You're not the guy that was here last week."
It was an ensign from Notre Dame.
And I'm thinking, no, but I'm the guy that's going to be here from now on. But those, we're both Catholic, but I'm Catholic by choice, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I think those nuns were harder on pretty girls.
They were.
I think they were a little harder on pretty girls.
All right. Just to go back to your story, how long in total did you spend in that nursing program?
3 years.
Okay.
And it had to be right to the half a day even. Well, when it, is that on or
Yeah,
off?
it's on. Yeah.
Anyway, I decided that, I didn't always have to do everything that those nuns thought, Catholic, being Catholic or not. But anyway, I went through we had a bear of a lady in our cafeteria. And if you didn't eat everything on that plate they gave you, you had nothing to say about what they put on it. They just, And
Like the mess halls.
yeah, and so she turned me in. So about that same time, we'll have a nutrition class. How we're supposed to have salads and this and that. And my mom was a good cook, and we lived on the farm, and we never needed for any food. So she said, Miss Kling, I have a report that you've been throwing food away. And this is war, and you don't do that. And I said, well, Sister Cecilian, if we could have a choice of how much they gave us or what they gave us, then that would be all right. But I said, for one thing, in nutrition class, they told us we needed salads and stuff. I said, macaroni salad with 4 pieces of celery. It's not vegetable. And so I got in trouble that time. And I didn't get punished, though. She didn't say much. And then another time, this lady that reported me, we had a rape case come in, and it was a young woman, not from the train, but from the city of South Bend, and she went to mail her invitations for her wedding, and a black guy raped her. Well, they brought her to the emergency room, and there's a procedure where they try to help them clean them. So it was primarily so they wouldn't be exposed to a disease. Is what that was.
Yeah.
But anyway, this gal came in, the supervisor, night supervisor came in, and she and she left. And I guess on her way out, she heard me say, well, what kind of a supervisor is she? I've never helped with any of this type of thing. She should be here to help me and show me the correct way to do it. I got yanked over, and so I told Sister Cecilian that. But anyway, there were a lot of good nuns there and good people, and it was a good experience for me. We both, Bud and I, came out as young adults.
It was a crucible for both of us.
Right.
And we were much different people when we came out. Oh, I could tell a lot of stories, but there's stuff that might get too personal about it. And I don't like to mention names. I should have probably mentioned some that I did.
I don't think you've caused any harm so far. So really, I mean, you understood at least a little bit about the nature of the military experience just from the program that you were in as well.
And when we went, certain activities, at least when we first went in, like if I came home on a bus, if it was summertime, I was supposed to have my cadet uniform on, because that would help advertise it. And then, like, we went to the USO, they encouraged us, that was one place we could go. And they didn't object to it. And we were supposed to
I figured you wouldn't get in any trouble there.
well,
Can you imagine how hard it must be to ride herd on a group of girls bursting with hormones, at 18, 20, 22 years old? I bet those sisters say, oh, how did I get into this?
well, one night, Sister Cecilian, probably because of my spunkiness, she called me up and she said, the switchboard operators for the whole hospital is sick and can't come, and could you do that? Well, I'd never been on a switchboard before. I thought, if I refuse her,
Did you do it?
yes, I did it. Thank goodness we didn't have many calls at night. And
Good thing it was night.
plugging in wires. Thank goodness. It's like first floor, east, west, you know, and they were labeled. Otherwise, she says, well, you sound good on the phone. You're clear. Well, yeah. But,
Nope.
so I got a little bit of everything. But I also learned something else. And that night, I learned something that I have kept always with me. You don't look down at people no matter what they're doing. And I was on the switchboard, and here's this rather plain nun, and scrubbing the floors with a mop, and all. And they even had a kind of a pecking order within their own unit. I could tell it, but Sister Mary Ellen, that was head of the hospital, wasn't that way. She was very nice to that lady, and she happened to come through during the night to see if everything was going okay. I don't know if she did that every night or not, but anyway, to see everything was right. And she stopped and talked pleasantly with this nun that was a scrubber. And that, my mom had always taught me a little bit about that, but don't judge a person by the way they look or what they're wearing. Because that little nun, whenever she'd see me, she'd always say hello to me. And the first time I saw her was that night when I was at the switchboard. Had I not been there, I probably never would have known her. But,
You know, I got to say about her education that it has been an ace in the hole for us. I don't know how many times. Whenever we move somewhere and I'd want to go back to school, she could get a job. They always wanted her to come to work at one of the hospitals. When we were in Ann Arbor, she worked in all 3 hospitals over there.
actually, the VA hospital, I didn't get paid for. We went in for what they call a refresher course, and then, of course, around here, they weren't doing the kidney dialysis and that like they are now, and they did that. But but I think my training was strict, and the kids, like my nieces that have gone into nursing, it was like any college. They went to the U of M. The summer was off, and but at the time we thought it was pretty rough.
Okay. Now, when Bud was overseas, how much would you hear from him?
Well, that was a little scary after I got that Dumbo turtle. When they go overseas, they have a special address.
Yeah, APO.
And I hadn't heard from him, and his mother hadn't heard from him. She had him missing, and I said, no, he's not missing until we get a report from someone. You'll be the one that gets it. I probably won't get it, but you will be the mother, parent. And what had happened was I went down on my, we had like a post office box, and he had a formula. I got a little one out here. I'll show you when I had it. But anyway, that came from this post office when they put new ones in. But anyway, if you couldn't remember your code to open it, you couldn't have that mail. And Jane, the little office girl that worked where you came in, if Sister Cecilia wasn't in her office, and when you first got there, you were so frustrated about so much stuff, you didn't always remember it. So she'd give it to me. So this one time, I went down there, and I hadn't gotten in for 3 weeks, or maybe more, maybe 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, here were all my letters returned. And I thought, oh my gosh. Then all of a sudden, I started getting letters from Bud, but they were old ones. But finally, mine went through, and then he wrote me and told me that he was okay, but I thought.
I don't know how she ever got her mom to do it. but she sent me a picture when I was over in Burma. Sitting on front
Before
of the
two-piece
kids' tent.
bathing suits were with
Two-piece
a halter top.
swimming suit on that didn't leave too much to the imagination.
Yeah, but they weren't bikini bottoms.
Well,
Well, it was by 1940s standards, they didn't leave much imagination.
all the guy says, "Oh, is that the girl you're gonna marry?" Yeah. Oh.
Oh, Mom was a
Her
good,
mom took the pictures.
Mom was a good sport.
Yeah.
Now, any of that you want to eliminate, you can.
No, no. I mean, people are interested in all different aspects of life and stuff
Yeah.
that doesn't make it into the books and this kind of thing. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think
I got out September something or other. I don't remember. Then I went and took my state boards down at Indianapolis.
We've been back here now since 1982 with the second owners of this house. It was built in about 1903,
We've remodeled it
and
now.
we've remodeled it all.
But
And we've enjoyed life fully. And we're still here. We're still working. I call her the chief accountant
Right.
because she's done all of our business. At one time, we had juggling five houses, and 3 here in Hartford, 1 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Florida. We've liquidated all of them
one
now.
in Ann Arbor.
1 in Ann Arbor. And when we moved over there, she said, this is our home. I don't want to sell it. I said, well, if you'll keep it rented and pay off the mortgage, we'll keep it. She did, kept it rented, and that was the
And
beginning.
then we bought your sister's half of your folks' house.
That was the beginning of her
And then we bought the house.
being a landlord.
okay. All right.
So,
But one thing I didn't tell. We both wanted to get married. And then I said to Bud, not until I've been out 1 year of nurses training. I said, the reason is, I want to have that experience before I have a family. And I want to have, and boy did, I was working, doing private duty, like 12 hours a day, and sometimes more. And so I was saving, I gave my money, Mom, so much, it was a piddling amount. And then I was having my bank account, savings account. In 1946, I was making 3% interest on a savings account. Now we don't get nearly that on a CD. But this year I'm not going to do the income tax. I'm going to get it ready for the girl, and she's going to do it.
Very good.
Because we've sold a place.
but she's still the chief accountant.
We sold. Oh, that shouldn't be on there.
It's harmless. All right. Well, I tell you, you've got great stories, and I'd just like to close this out here by thanking you
Yeah.
both for taking the time to share them today.
Well, thank you. But you can cut anything that you. There was too many things.